I'm Susan Deitzel. I'm the co-founder.
What's your name?
Susan Deitzel, the co-founder of UrbanABQ, which is an urbanist collective of folks who have been together close to 7 years advocating for a downtown Albuquerque which is more densely populated, walkable, bikeable, and much greater altogether. And we're getting there. We're moving along. Can anyone see me? No. I can't see my notes.
It's a little too dark.
Yeah, we can hear.
Oh, thanks, Bob. So tonight, maybe I'll stand over here. You don't need to look at me. How's that? Okay, that's good. Well, what was that, Alice? Oh, okay.
I thought he was turning the lights on. So
Oh, okay, okay. So, before we get started, I want to explain that this event was organized very quickly. I'm not making excuses, but UrbanABQ is attempting to put on these talks roughly once a month. So it's not what we do for our get-togethers or not for get-togethers. This is something else entirely, where we bring people together to talk about all kinds of aspects of living in cities and ways to make them better. So that's what we call UrbanABQ Presents. And it just so happened that a couple of weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, I heard from David Rusk, found out he was going to be here, asked him if he would do a talk, and he said yes. So, hence tonight. But before I introduce David, I want to thank Dan Majewski, who's the co-chair of UrbanABQ. Did a lot of work. And Brian Riley, who's here somewhere, right there, barely raising his hand. And I want to also say thank you to the Andalus Hotel. I feel really funny talking to that post. I want to thank the Andalus. Gary Goodman, the owner of the Andalus, and I got together years ago and talked about the mission of our organization, and he's so in support of it that he's always let us use his meeting spaces at no charge. So they are one of our sponsors. And so tonight, we'll get right into talking about David Rusk. He was a civil rights worker from 63 to 68, and then that was in Washington, D.C. And then he worked for the Labor Department. He was the legislative director, but at a certain point, he was loaned to the city of Albuquerque for 2 years. So he and his wife, Delcia, moved here in 1971 for 2 years, and they stayed 20. And very quickly, he became a state legislator from his district in the Southeast Heights. And 2 years later, it must have been, I don't even know where David is. Oh, there he is. 2 years later, he became mayor of Albuquerque. Served from 1977 to 81. After that, worked as an executive for PNM. And after 20 years, they did move back to Washington, D.C. And since then, he's had a full career advising cities all over the U.S. and the globe on solving urban problems. I gotta go to my next page. Oh, I have to tell you how we met. I can't remember how many years ago. I want to think it was about 4 years ago. I don't need notes for this. I came in one morning after going to the gym, and I always leave public radio on, and I caught the last perhaps 5 minutes of a program that was live from the Woodrow Wilson Center, and I was just half listening to it. But as the interviewer closed, they said, we've been speaking to David Rusk, former mayor of Albuquerque, author of a book called Cities Without Suburbs. And I thought, oh, I don't know about this person. But that was before I lived here. So I did what I do. I got on the phone right away and called the Woodrow Wilson Center. And I just said, how do I get in contact with this person? And they said, oh, here's his phone number. It was that tough. And I don't quite remember how it went, but it was something like, do you come to Washington, D.C.? And as it happens, my really good friend lives there, and I go a couple times a year. We ended up getting together. Well, actually, we have a number of times now.
to talk about all things geeky and urban, because I'm crazy about that stuff. And of course he is as well. And his son and daughter-in-law still live here, so the Rusks have occasions to come here, and it just so happens. So I don't personally believe in coincidence. I think it all happens for a reason. I'm glad he's here. It's nothing connected to a religion. Oh, and someone who's not here, who I'm going to quote tonight, Nick Manoli. I haven't seen him. Nick's not here, is he? I talked to him yesterday. Yeah, I can't see. I talked to him yesterday at the Bradbury Stamp ceremonial signing of the art project contract, and he said, Susan, can't wait to come and hear David Rusk speak. You know, I remember when he was mayor and the man was visionary. And that's the word I keep hearing repeated over and over again, that while he was mayor, only one term, he was visionary. So having him here tonight to speak to us is a really big treat. And without taking any more time, here he is, David Rusk.
Somebody here that can turn lights on, that's fine, that's great. Especially you don't need to see my mug in high profile. Well, I thank you very much for being here. I see many old friends, but I also see many new faces, which is encouraging because each generation has to assume the responsibility for carrying forward the vision, the vitality of their community. Since leaving here, and I just want to say to you that please understand when I'm talking tonight, it's been 25 years since Delcy and I lived here. It's been 35 years since I was mayor. And I'm sure that some of the things that I will say tonight may not reflect or fit in with current conditions. Certainly put me right. I always want to learn from these kinds of circumstances, but also cut me a little slack, if you will. In that 25 years, I have spoken and consulted in over 130 metropolitan areas in 35 states in this country. So I've seen a lot of communities to which I can compare Albuquerque, and from which I can share some of the ways that they have solved problems that they have in common with us. I've also lectured abroad in Canada, in Germany, in England, and I have served as a visiting professor of urban planning at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So I've got some foreign experiences to feed into that as well. I'm going to talk to you some time ago, and I don't know if Susan, if you mentioned this, she asked me if I would look at the draft ABCZ comprehensive plan that was being developed. And I said, sure. Little did I know that that would thrust upon me reading through 451 pages. But I did so readily, because, well, number one, it's a very fine achievement, and an awful lot of it is very well done. But there were some things that, from my experience, were missing, that either weren't mentioned at all, or at least were not mentioned to the degree that they should. And I'd like to share those with you tonight. Now, I really would like for this to be a constant conversation between me and you and amongst you. That's one reason why we've sort of angled the chairs here. And I'm going to set a few ground rules, if I may. If you want to ask a question, make a comment, challenge something I've said, or support something with your own experience, please stand. And I will recognize you as soon as I see you. If I've been sort of looking over here and somebody stands over here and I don't see them, start pointing that way to help me out there. Stand and speak right out. And I will probably come walking up this middle aisle to get as close to you as I can. You see, back around 1975, when I was in the legislature, I effectively lost the hearing of my right ear. Now, I'm sure it was no surprise to my critics when I was mayor of Albuquerque. I didn't hear voices from the right very well. But the left here. Now, Pete, you and I didn't serve together, so the left here was great for a long time. But about a dozen years ago, it began to go as well. And so I hear with the aid of a cochlear implant. Okay, if I didn't have it, I'd be stone deaf. And it works quite well, but and these are circumstances in which the closer that I stand to you, the more I'm likely to understand your question clearly. But also speak right out so that everybody else can hear you. And if somebody here in the front rows has an observation or question, I'm likely to stand over here so that you're facing the rest of the audience so they can hear you in that respect. The cochlear implant has both saved my quality of life and saved my career as a speaker and consultant. Cochlear implant is also the only thing that's ever linked my name and Rush Limbaugh's in the same sentence. We both have them. But any event, well, I'm going to speak to you basically about three major topics that really are not brought forward in the draft comprehensive plan. One is annexation. The second is Albuquerque Public Schools and the schools in general. And the third is mixed income housing. There's a lot of talk about affordable housing. There's a lot of talk about mixed use development, but there's not much focus at all on the question of mixed income housing, which creates economically integrated neighborhoods and neighborhood schools, most importantly. So I'm going to be focusing on these three topics. But before we do, let me run a little survey here. And I'm going to have some help here from Rick. Suppose you were to contemplate not living in the United States, but moving to some other country. And I don't mean as an old guy like me, retirement income pretty well set. I mean as a young person just setting out. You're going to move to a country where you're going to try to develop your career, get married, raise a family, or bring your wife with you or husband with you to that new country, become quite possibly a citizen, part of that body politic, etc. What country would to you be a very attractive alternative to living in the United States? Let's hear some folks pop up and give me some suggestions. Who's got a place in mind?
Australia.
Let's see, I couldn't, somebody's gonna have to stand up if you've got a suggestion. Stand up?
Australia.
Australia. How many folks would see Australia as a real alternative? Let's see some hands here.
Speaking.
Yeah, pretty good sport. Australia, okay. Well, Rick, then we'll put Australia up there. Let's hear another one. Yes, please stand.
Denmark.
Denmark. Denmark. How many would see Denmark as a possibility? I certainly would. Oh, that's got a lot of support. Well, the Danes have got the Aussies beat, I think, at this point. Let's hear another one. Yes, ma'am, please stand.
Iceland.
Iceland. Okay, Iceland. How many? You get thrilled by the World Cup? By the Europa? How many would see Iceland as an interesting possibility? Well, quite a few. So let's put Iceland up there as well.
Okay.
Let's get another one here. Yes, sir.
Colombia.
All right, Colombia. How many? You know, they've just had a big development in Colombia in terms of finally having peace between, between the guerrillas and the government. How many would see Colombia as a good place to be? Maybe. I would not put Colombia up there at the moment. All right, let's get one or two more.
Germany?
Pete, go ahead. Germany. All right, let's see Germany. Germany's got a reasonable sport. One more.
Japan.
Spain? Japan, okay. Japan. All right, let's put Japan in there. I think we pretty well closed down our list, but what would you like to suggest? Spain, okay. I may just put it in there somewhere, not go to a second sheet.
Okay.
Just squeeze it in there somewhere, Spain.
Squeeze it in.
Okay. You can see that Rick and Susan are putting together some numbers in that other column called factor X. And I'll explain to you what factor X is now. Factor X is all the taxes that are paid to the national government, plus all the taxes that are paid to state or provincial governments, plus all the taxes that are paid to local governments, and taxes paid to all these levels of governments for all purposes whatsoever. Okay? And then that total tax bill, if you will, is compared to the gross domestic product of that country. That is the real economy of goods and services, not the speculative wealth economy that Wall Street keeps fooling around with, okay? So what do we have here? We have Australia, if you will, the real tax rate, 27.5%. Denmark, 48.6. I'll tell you that's numero uno, that's the highest. By the way, Denmark also has the most equal distribution of income, and by their own self-assessment, they are the happiest people on earth. So, Iceland, 35.5%. Spain, 30.6%. Germany, 36.7%. Japan, 30.3%. Could you find Colombia?
I didn't, you just look for it, I thought we were skipping it.
Okay.
We made
Here is the USA in 2014. These are all 2014 numbers.
Columbia, we do have it, 16.5. Wow.
Is it 16.5?
16.5, yes.
The point is that every one of these countries that you told me you could see as a good place to live as an alternative to the United States, you would pay a higher level of taxes than you do in the United States. Our real tax rate, in effect, all levels of government, 25.4%. The sole exception here is Colombia at 16.5%. Our ties with Mexico, historically and to some degree demographically these days, are such that I'll throw Mexico in here, and Mexico,
You know that one?
19.7 as I recall. Okay?
What about?
I would suggest to you folks,
What about the Netherlands?
I'm sorry,
What about the Netherlands? Holland?
Netherlands is up there in the 40% brackets as
I'll
well.
look it up.
Basically, France, the Netherlands, Scandinavian countries are up there in the 40% level roughly. Yes.
David, do those numbers actually represent discrepancies in income between low and high income citizens?
No, they do not. They represent the taxes that everybody pays, whether you're down here or up there, to all those levels of government. That's just sort of the total tax bill of the society.
Yeah.
It is not your marginal rate that you might pay as a homeowner, okay? And
Holland, Netherlands, 37.
what would you conclude from this? Is there a general theme or moral that you could include from this? Yes, please. Stand and speak right out. Oh, Ramsey, how are you?
You get more. Get more.
What would you conclude from this?
You get what you pay for.
You pay more, you get more? Is that, did I hear that?
You
Okay.
get what you pay for.
You get what you pay for?
Yes.
Okay, well, maybe in terms of Columbia, you can say that, that public life is pretty hard in Columbia. Hopefully, important things have happened now, but I would just suggest to you that,
How many of
yes,
those
Pete.
how many of those countries have socialized medicine?
Or national health care.
Yeah, national
We call
health.
it that.
To my knowledge, every one of these except Colombia, Mexico, and maybe Japan has some form of national health care.
I believe Mexico does as well.
Mexico does as well? Gotcha, okay. I would suggest to you that taxes are simply the dues we pay for the opportunity to live in a civilized community, okay? And to illustrate this, and let's go to this first one here, if we could. We got it on here, okay. Here are some top ones. This is the column we've just been looking at, for example. Okay, these are the top 5. Denmark, France, Belgium, Finland, Sweden. Okay, all up in there in the 40s. Here are the bottom 5. And I've taken off the list the oil sheikdoms, because they're just crazy. I mean, a place like Oman or Abu Dhabi or the like, 1 or 2% in taxes because they're just rolling in oil money. So I've taken those away from this. So the bottom 5 are Afghanistan, Guinea-Bissau, Burma, or Myanmar as it's known now, Sudan, the Central African Republic. By the way, these numbers come from the World Bank. The numbers I showed you before had another source. Do anybody would like to guess what that source was? The Heritage Foundation, which is the most conservative foundation in the country. That is one of the 10 factors that they measure in their annual index of economic freedom. Except that the Heritage Foundation thinks these guys are great and thinks these guys are terrible. Now, it factored in for all the other things like the rule of law and a variety of other factors. These folks on the top of this list come out pretty well in the Heritage Foundation overall list as well. But the point is, in this, for 35, at least 40 years, we've been told, the mantra has been, Americans are overtaxed, Americans overtaxed, cut taxes, cut taxes. It is a fraud. It has always been a fraud. It's serving other purposes than speaking to the question of economic growth and the quality of life that the people in our country have. And I think about this. I pick up the Journal this morning and I see the debate going on up in Santa Fe about shall we call a special session, and the governor put on, or at least some legislators are proposing the governor put on a call for an increase in sin taxes, right? You got to see that in the context that among the developed free market economies of the world, the 34 members of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, we have the 4th lowest tax rate of all of our peers, So just don't think about what your community needs. Think about what we need to pay to achieve that. Think about the way the payment of it needs to be structured in a way that's fair to people, so that they at each level of income and circumstance in their life, they are in a sense paying a fair share for their circumstances, and not think that we should just oppose any tax increases because America's overtaxed. Compared to whom? We are not overtaxed. We are one of the lowest taxed countries in the world. Even on that Heritage Foundation list, which was every country, there were 59 countries with higher tax rates than the United States. on that list. And most of the others below us, you wouldn't want to live there. Okay? So, coming back to the comprehensive plan, knowing this kind of information, as I do, that's fine. We can be ready to go to the pictures at the end. When I see a sentence like this in the comprehensive plan, I say to myself, well, wait a minute, this bears some looking into. And the sentence in the comprehensive plan was, fiscal constraints dictate the public purchase of proposed park and open space land. Future large-scale acquisition to maintain and improve the quality level of services the area will need a concerted effort and priority by the public and decision makers. I mean, and so I
have a question, I'm jumping in.
Oh, I
Is
see,
that
okay.
How many here know what the comprehensive plan is? Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, good,
Okay,
good
good.
question.
Lots of
So I decided I'd look into this with regard to the city of Albuquerque. Actually, I looked into it several years before this summer in a email debate I was having with Jerry Frug, a very noted lawyer, law professor at Harvard University Law School. And so I just frankly, in my material that I sent to the staff and to Susan, lifted material out of a long discussion I had with him. But for example, in terms of the gross receipts tax, we get 1.225% of the 5.125% that the state automatically collects. About a quarter of that comes automatically to this city or every city in New Mexico. Then the legislature has authorized various optional taxes, some of which could be enacted simply by action of the city council, others of which must be subject to a popular referendum. But those add up to what we're currently receiving is $298 million in fiscal 2014, which was 34% of the operating budget of the city, okay? However, the various optional gross receipts taxes authorized by the legislature total 2.3125%. Albuquerque currently has imposed among those authorized legislatures 1.0625, less than half of the potential gross receipts taxing authority that the legislature has said you can do. Okay? So, if the city council and the mayor were of a mind to step out and do so, there is legal authority to do so in terms of that. And by the way, of the 1.0625 that the city actually collects, 2/4 cents were adopted. In other words, virtually half of that was adopted in 1981 by the Albuquerque City Council and myself as mayor, which at that time represented a tripling of the city's optional take on gross receipts taxes. Those actions passed 9-0 for the first 1/4 cent and 8-1 for the second. The one vote against was Tom Hoover, former Republican legislator, who just said, well, I think we ought to maybe digest the first 1/4 cent before we talk about the second 1/4 cent. But he didn't make a big deal of it. Immediately thereafter, we had the mayor election, we had the council races for 5. The issue of that tax increase, as I recall, was not an issue with any one of the 10 candidates for mayor or the multiple candidates for the city council seat. Why? In part because nobody had told them to be angry about it. Okay? But if you have a portion of your political structure that is telling you constantly, you've got to be angry about this, you got to be angry about this, you're overtaxed, rise up in arms, then you're in trouble. I mean, I was defeated for re-election, largely by Gordon Sanders, frankly, for those of you who could think back. But the issue of this very big increase in taxes was never brought up in that election by any of the mayoral candidates in that respect. So, if we look at property taxes, I'll just jump to the bottom line. Something's happening now that did not happen when I was mayor. We have state authority, and the current administration and city council are using it to send a lot of property tax into the general fund for general operating purposes. In my day, the policy was you use property tax to support general obligation bond to build streets and park and recreation facilities and community centers and firehouses and libraries, but you don't use it, just to pay the bills for this year's set of services. Well, I would say that, Susan has this material available for you. It can be reasonably estimated that the city is utilizing only about half of its GO bond capacity. This estimate is further confirmed by the millage rate that the city levies for GO bond indebtedness. The statutory limit is 12 mils. As of 2012, the actual property tax rate for general obligation indebtedness was 4.976 mils, leaving 7.024 mils, or well over half of the authority, unutilized. So, folks, any constraints? Yes. Go ahead, Ramsey. Now, Ramsey, could you step forward since this gentleman is here?
I have a specific question. Partly, I kind of reread your book last night and didn't get much sleep because I kept reading.
Okay, speak out as loud as you can.
I'm behind. I keep saying, I live downtown, I've lived there for 35 years, right on the central, right, and I keep saying, I don't mind paying taxes, but I wish my taxes were going into my neighborhood. And also, well, I live in a different neighborhood.
No, I'm just.
And one of the things that you sort of talked about was about infill housing, multi-unit housing, and how it's best to be spread around the city. And again, this is only my opinion, but it seems like so much of the new development with sort of low-income housing is being put downtown, and I feel hurting the fabric of the historic neighborhoods. They're not paying, and the developers are getting like 40-year tax-free, no property taxes, and that's what's driving me crazy. I mean, that's where I start.
That is a great segue into the third point I want to talk about. So I'll come back to that kind of question. But you said you wish that more of your taxes were coming into your neighborhood. You are probably, and even though the DNA they're in pretty good shape, you are probably still getting more in terms of services and facilities in the DNA or into any of these areas right down here than you actually could afford. That could actually be provided from just what you pay. So not only is in effect what you're paying in taxes coming back to support facilities and services in your area, probably a piece of Fort Hills is as well, you see. I mean, this Albuquerque is a big fiscal box, and if a South San Jose, and we're its own standalone municipality, and believe me, there are places in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and the like that are just that situation. They would be bankrupt. They could not afford the facilities they have. They could not afford the level of service they had just from what they are able to raise from taxes. I'll give you the ultimate example. Camden, New Jersey, which was once a great industrial center. You had RCA, you had Campbell Soup, you had all kinds of people. Those are all gone. And their middle class is all gone. And yet they still have 16,000 children in the city public schools. And over 95% of those children qualify for free or subsidized meals. If the Camden City School District had to depend solely on the local taxes that could be raised, they would have enough money to operate the schools for days a year. 97% of the Camden City School District comes from the federal government or primarily from the state. So if we didn't have APS, of course, if you didn't have the legislature funding everybody's schools, and you had a South San Jose school district dependent upon its own resources, they'd be just like Camden. You see, so you are benefited from being part of a big fiscal box. Yes.
Speaking of big fiscal boxes, one other issue that we have in Albuquerque is the overriding authority of the county and the city. And the county choosing to support a project like Santa Lena, which forces the city to spend to give access to it, when the city doesn't have any choice about funding.
Okay. That is a good way to segue into my first topic, which is annexation. The comprehensive plan, and it's 451 pages, devotes one short paragraph to annexation, and it's strictly a historical retrospective about how Martineztown, Santa Barbara, and Old Town, Morelos were annexed at a certain time. That's it. What sent me up the wall, frankly, literally did, was when the planning department sent me a PowerPoint that they had, in which it said that one of the basic concepts of the comprehensive plan is no more annexation, expected. And I absolutely went up the wall. I said that would be a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake. And I subsequently learned a lot more. Let me say this right off the bat. The fact that even with the constraints they impose, the fact that state law has given Albuquerque, city of Albuquerque, the power to annex new development as it occurs in the region and expand its boundaries from 3 square miles in 1930 to 188 square miles by 2010, and in the process capturing 85% of all the new population growth and 90% of all the new tax base. That has been more important for Albuquerque's health and future than anything that any comprehensive plan has put forth, than any environmental planning commission has approved, that any city council has approved. That has been the underlying policy that has provided for the growth and health of the city, and for the fact that by Moody's, Albuquerque is a AA1 bond rated, and by Standard & Poor's a AAA bond rated city, and you can't get better than AAA. Pete.
Mayor, a few years ago, and when I say a few years ago, I'm talking about 15 years ago.
Right.
Maybe as much as 20 years ago. There was a certain state senator that led the fight to take away Albuquerque, the city of Albuquerque's water utility, to create the Water Utility Authority, In addition to that, they took away the city's authority to annex property.
Without the approval of the county.
That's what I was leading up to, without the approval of the county. When I was on the city council, what I remember very vividly is where we would all constantly, we were very aggressive with annexation. And I think those two pieces of legislation have done a major disservice to the city of Albuquerque. And I don't know if you agree with that.
Disservice.
Disservice.
Yes.
Because I believe that you're basically now in the hands of the county. And that's what we're going to be faced with Santa Elena on the west side. They're going to go ahead and do this development, or they're talking about doing it. But there's a real question as to what is Santa Elena's really intent. Do they want to eventually be annexed by the city of Albuquerque? And there's an overextension now involved with annexation, and it takes away from building up the fundamental services, that is the utilities in Albuquerque. So I'd like to ask you to comment on that. Do you think that that was a mistake for us to allow the legislature to take away this authority from the city and say, no, the county needs to vote on it?
Well,
is that a fair question?
Absolutely, it's a central question. First of all, let me say that I have, of the 130 metropolitan areas that I've been in, and I don't go in and give a standard canned national speech. I will examine that community. I will look at census reports over the decades. I will look at property assessment reports. I'll look at school report cards. I'll really develop a statistical profile of a community. About 2/3 of those 130% have been what I would call regions with inelastic central cities that cannot expand through annexation. And they are surrounded typically by a multiplicity of little boxes suburbs. If Albuquerque had been in New Jersey and had grown the way it has, but under New Jersey laws, the city of Albuquerque, let's say of 1940, would be 11 square miles, about the size of Camden, by the way. And what we think of as the Albuquerque urbanized area would be about 30 to 40 independent boroughs and townships, and as many different school systems. Okay? And so there is, when you talk in terms of bond ratings, credit ratings, there is only one central city in America out of over 600 which has not been able to expand its boundaries at all over the last 70 years, that has a AAA bond rating. Anybody like to guess what it is? Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I tell what I would call zero-elastic central cities. Well, if you want to follow the Cambridge model, all you have to do is sit across the other side of what amounts to a little creek from the regional and maybe international business center of Boston, and be home to 2 of the 5 best universities in the world. And then maybe you can be a AAA bond rated community as well. There is a 90% correlation between the ability of a city to expand and capture the growth of its central county, or in the case of some, multiple counties. There's a 90% correlation between that and the ability and its bond rating as of 2012. In other words, you don't have to tell me anything about who the mayor is or who the city council is. You just tell me what has been their success in making their suburbs part of their city, and I can likely tell you what their bond rating is. And the funny thing is that Moody's and Standard & Poor's, that's one of their active factors, one of their top factors. In fact, when I read a news story back in the early 90s, which they said they were going to give a lot more attention to this, the vice president gave a speech up in New York, and I read it in the Washington papers, and I got on the phone, and I tracked him down, and just graciously introduced myself, and and said, I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate the fact that he says, well, we've been reading your book. So, Dallas is a massive city, 342 square miles. It's about twice the size of Albuquerque. But since 1980, Dallas has not been able to annex anything because it's been surrounded by a ring of incorporated municipalities, the McKinneys, the Richardsons, the Friscos, etc. It's not changed at all. And Dallas's bond rating has gone from AAA to AA1. And at the time I emailed Susan about this in an email, I said, I'll bet it's gone down even further since I last checked. And I checked and they're now a AA2. They're farther down the line. That's going to happen to Albuquerque unless you turn the situation around. And Counselor, it wasn't a factor, obviously, of the city letting the legislature do this. My perception is that during that period of time, the county commission was a very politically astute and well-connected set of veteran commissioners. You had Tommy Rutherford, you had Les Houston serving on that commission, and they had a very competent county manager in Juan Vigil, for example. And they just, stripped through the legislature Albuquerque of these powers. That is the single greatest public policy issue that the future of the city of Albuquerque, faces. And it can only be solved through politics. I haven't looked at your county commission districts, but I do know, and there may be one district which may be all, quote, county people without city residents. But I can tell you that 80% of the constituents of the county commission are also city residents. And those actions are directly damaging, over the long run, the 80% of their constituents who are city residents. You need to start electing to the Bernalillo County Commission county commissioners who are first and foremost concerned about the 80% of their constituents who are also residents. Yes, go ahead.
So, having a AAA bond rating is great for many reasons, but I'm not sure that it correlates with a good quality of life. So, annexation, I wonder if there's not a better way than just having annexation as the way to keep your tax base free. So, in other words, I've seen this here and I've seen this in other places. The resources of the city go to the fringes. They follow the developers. So then you want to annex, and that's great. But we forget about our urban core. You can see that, finally some money seems to be coming back to the older neighborhoods and reinvesting in it. But for decades and decades, the infrastructure collapsed, the sewers, the pipes, everything was building parks and streets and schools on the fringes. And I've seen that in other parts of the country too. So it's great you have a AAA rating, but you've got these neighborhoods that are struggling. We've got so many of them. And I wonder if there's a better way to allocate taxes so that you can, sharing them regionally instead of just gobbling up. The county invests in some new development, and then boom, the city comes in and grabs it. Actually, I lived in Virginia for a while, and their cities are independent of the counties. And the only way for the cities
hurts them.
Oh, it kills them.
Yeah. Since 1979, they've been dying.
Yeah, it's a terrible. That's
Gettysburg is almost bankrupt now.
Yeah, exactly. And the only way to do it is to annex. But then there's no incentive for the county to make development because the city's going to come along and take it.
Right.
So, maybe a city-county merger. I know that's. I'm just saying, just strict annexation. It seems to me is problematic.
Very, very good comments and observations. Really are.
Could he repeat
and let me-
what it was that people had such a
response to
Oh,
just.
city county merger.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's
Would you like to hear some more other comments from folks about this theme? Anybody else like to speak to this at the moment?
Over
Sure.
here, David.
Yes.
So in cities like Buffalo and Cleveland and Milwaukee and many others that you're familiar with, I'm sure, the population of those cities in the 1950s is now the population of those counties, right? And so if those cities were to annex the sprawl into the county, they might be able to capture the tax base. And perhaps you're saying keep their AAA bond ratings. But what's the logic, what's the limit of annexation through sprawl? And what happens when you consider the cost to serve farther and farther development? Things like the GASB standards that are starting to become required to report the liability to the city of serving farther and farther development. When you start to look at that, you start to see that the balance sheet is really a net negative with farther and farther out. And then the last question would be, what about demographic trends? We're seeing folks, the baby boomers, what we're hearing from things like ULI, PricewaterhouseCoopers in their annual survey is boomers are moving from the suburban households that they raised their families in and wanting to move into mixed-use, pedestrian-friendly, transit-served places, right? And when you look at Albuquerque, for the last few years, we've been sliding down in being attractive to that demographic. And so you've got boomers selling their houses and very few people buying them, right? There's not enough people after them to buy those suburban houses. So what do you see the trend of demographics and shift, and then this sort of liability that we haven't accounted for perhaps in our bond ratings as the GASB standards try to account for? How do you net that all out?
Any other comments at the moment? You all hear that?
Yeah.
Good.
What's the GASB standard?
Can you explain that, Brian?
So from what I understand, it is the government is starting to require, or bond ratings are starting to require, not just the cost that you're getting in tax returns, but you're supposed to look at the lifespan of your infrastructure, and you're supposed to net that out of those costs, right? So it's not just what you're getting in taxes from that sprawl, but how much it costs to serve that sprawl, what's the useful life of that sprawl, and when will you need to replace the infrastructure that you're gaining those taxes from. So it's kind of adding that liability to what right now, as I understand, is really just the tax yield.
Right. Is that clear enough for you?
Thank you.
Okay, a lot of wonderful things out here to talk about. First of all, let me make my own position clear. That a region, a city, is far better off controlling sprawl than simply capturing its market share. But controlling it requires two things. It requires a state law that gives you, like Oregon's law, like the state of Washington's law, for example, gives you the power, or directs you really, to draw urban growth boundaries and to enforce them. Okay? When you talk about older communities within the Portland area, the Greshams and the Zilwaukees, the like, which are old blue-collar suburbs of the city of Portland, they've been going through a boom because since the development cannot be accommodated out there in the farmlands, because they won't be allowed, you know, the investment interests are turning their attention back in on, you know, these older, somewhat bypassed communities. Not just the city of Portland, but so many of these communities are benefiting from that. And so that would be my preference. But you are a long, long way in New Mexico from having the legislature adopt a Oregon-style statewide growth management law. Okay? And so if the development is going to occur, it's much better to be part of the city than not. And that gets back to the topic that we've discussed here. One of the great tools that Albuquerque had, and there were special constraints based on Albuquerque's annexation policies imposed by the legislature. But one of the compensatory provisions of the legislature was that the city of Albuquerque not only had extraterritorial zoning power for up to 5 miles beyond your borders, within that zone, 5 miles beyond your borders, any public incorporation was banned. Not just a new city, but a quasi-public water department, for example, or sewer service. And so, even though they made it kind of tough for Albuquerque to annex, being in the Southwest, if a builder wanted to develop a new subdivision, and the city said, you're going to have to annex if you want our water and sewer service, that was powerful leverage. And we've lost that now with the Water Authority, except that the Water Authority has got its 7-member policy board, 3 from the city, 3 from the county. You elect a couple of county commissioners who are going to focus on what serves the long-term interests of the economic center of New Mexico, the city of Albuquerque, and they could change as a matter of policy that. I mean, they could say, as a matter of board policy, if this is going to be a more intensive urban development, for us to provide water authority, water and sewer, you're going to have to annex to the city of Albuquerque. You know, that's, in a sense, what man does, man can undo in terms of the legislature. You don't even have to change legislative law for that. In terms of investing back, I have already suggested sort of partial answers to that in terms of bringing resources back into the city. I think if we actually went and studied the actual facts here, I think you'd find a lot of investment of city resources coming back into the older communities. A lot of what we see in terms of the public facilities of newly developed subdivisions are the result of the planning requirements, for example, that require the builder to put in sidewalks, that require the builder to dedicate parkland, that, at least in my day, we instituted the first utility expansion charge that required the builder to pay the city water and sewer department, resources department, a certain number of bucks for water and sewer service. And I suspect that, the fact that Martinez Town, Santa Barbara didn't have any sidewalks ever until at least some model cities money came along, reflects the fact that they grew up in an era where there weren't these requirements upon anybody who was going to build. So all I would just say is maybe this is something that that really needs to be studied in terms of how city resources are really flowing in that respect. I can't give you a definitive answer on that. Yes?
That's
Pete?
something that I do too.
Pardon?
What is your
Pete's got
feeling?
something that I do too.
Tax increment districts. This is something that has always been controversial in Albuquerque, where the developers are very well given a free rein not to pay any taxes to do the very type of developments you were talking about, the streets, the sewers, and what have you. What do you think? How do you think Albuquerque should address tax increment districts?
Well, that's not the way I identify tax increment districts. So maybe the laws have changed since I was around here. But the first tax increment district legislation was adopted while I was in the legislature. And what it said was, and it was specifically focused on downtown redevelopments, it said that there was nothing that went to the benefit of the developer. It said that that the value of this property, let's say of the old First National Bank building, value of this property is set at the current year's level, and now it's going to be redeveloped, and the assessed valuation of that property is going to go way up. for the next 10 years, if we declare this a tax increment project, the monies, the property taxes from that increased value will not be distributed to the county, will not be distributed to the schools, will not be distributed to AMAFCA or whomever, but rather it will come into a tax increment fund, and that tax increment fund will be used to upgrade the public facilities of the target district. So that's what I understood. It wasn't that the developer was getting anything. It was that our other fellow governments were being asked to be patient, because then they'd get a big payoff in the 10th year onward when that was being done. So that's what I understand about tax increment districts. But let me tell you, the incentives that most investors face when, for example, deciding whether they're going to build a new Facebook, facility, or whether they're going to build a new branch plant. The key is the quality of the local labor force. That's the primary factor. And any tax incentives are simply frosting on the cake, and very often unnecessary frosting on the cake. How would everybody like to stand and just shake themselves out for a minute or two? I have a feeling we've been sitting here for a while.
I think we're running down on time anyway, but I wanted to, well, maybe 5 more minutes.
Yeah, let me. Okay, I'm going to give you one more. We've talked about the public schools. I was told this was to run to 8.
Well, yes, go a little longer. Go, give it another 10. I just want to make sure everyone gets their Q&A in. But as it turns out,
this has been sort of a
we're
running
mixing it up.
Q&A. Am I wrong? Have you really had questions you've not been able to put out at this point?
Okay.
Let me just say, I think we've hit the question of annexation pretty well. I'll say it again. It is the major public policy issue confronting the future health of this city. If you're not going to have a statewide growth management law, which you obviously are not. The second omission was the public schools. And that's sort of strange, because the public schools, if you take away the city's ownership of the public right of way, all the streets, the public schools probably neck and neck with the Albuquerque Parks and Recreation Department in terms of being the biggest landowner in Albuquerque, #1. APS has a bigger operating budget than the city of Albuquerque and Bernier County combined. And they're running a bigger transit system than ABQ Ride. Okay? I mean, but the importance of their involvement is really from a school point of view, because the two most important inputs in terms of any school are how many kids are we going to have, and what's their sort of family, social, economic status. There is typically, in Albuquerque, by the way, the number is 0.75, 75% correlation on 3rd grade test scores and 78% for 5th grade test scores between the test scores and the percentage of children, low-income children, that qualify for free and reduced price lunch in a school. When somebody around here or anywhere in the country says, oh, such and such is a good school, frankly, they rarely know anything about the principal, or the teachers, or the curriculum. They are really responding to what they view as the socioeconomic status of the student body and what flows from that in terms of educational outcomes. Yes?
Is that correlation, in your experience, consistent across other medium-sized cities in the United States? That correlation between test scores and socioeconomic status?
Is it consistent with what?
Is that a consistent pattern nationwide?
Yes. I myself have done 22 such studies, metropolitan area studies, of all the schools. And the correlations run from 0.65 to 0.88. 65, I mean, 0.88 is astonishing for any social environment. But there's a corollary to that, and that is that low-income children learn best when they are surrounded by middle-class children. Okay? And I think in some respects, most parents know this, because when they go looking for buying a home in Albuquerque and they have children to raise, they're thinking, well, where are the, quote, good schools?
Right.
And what they're really looking at is largely, where are the schools filled with children like my kid, or maybe even a little higher up the scale? Okay? Yes.
Okay, I'm Janet Sayers, and you were actually my boss.
Good to see you, Janet.
35 some plus years ago, and
It was 35 years for me. It was only 10 years for you.
and right now I'm very much involved with the Albuquerque Public Schools, and I'm an advocate for Del Norte High School, which has the worst graduation rate and the worst truancy rate, dropout rate of all of the APS schools. And it has suffered from the downward spiral of once you start shrinking, then you have fewer electives, you have fewer advanced placement classes. And in Albuquerque, two very destructive things have been really almost an open enrollment. It's said that you have to stay in your district, but you really don't. And then charter schools, which have sucked away, and they're publicly funded, and for Representative Miera, who's an expert, but you know, the fact that charter schools in Albuquerque are being compared to small school districts like Cuesta or Mora, or you know, so people want to take their kids to publicly funded charter schools because you have little classes of 10 and 15 and 20. But I just wanted to say that there's going to be a very important election come this February for 3 of the districts, Lorenzo Garcia, David Piercy, and the South Valley District. And people really need to understand the struggles of public schools and teachers, and I'm not sure where I was going with this point. Except that, yes,
I think you achieved your political goal.
but, I mean, it's really, considering only 2 or 3% of the population go and vote for one of the biggest governments. I mean, talk about city government having an impact, but public schools, it's really something. So, I mean, I appreciate you being here, and I've actually learned a lot, and I'm sitting with a fellow Del Norte Knight from anyway, thank you, and I'm not sure what I was trying to say.
The point is that in these 22 metropolitan areas where I've done these in-depth studies, and I've done, for example, I've studied all 199 school districts in North New Jersey, and the like. But basically, you tell me one thing about a school, the percentage of children that qualify for low and reduced price meals, and I will tell you what the test scores are in that school, sight unseen, within 4 or 5 percentage points, 90% of the time. You know, don't need to know about anything else about school, need to know that. But the other thing, as I said, is that low-income children learn best, you know, when they're surrounded by middle-class children. And that brings us to the topic of mixed income housing. There's a reasonable amount of discussion in the comprehensive plan about affordable housing, but there are also comments there which seem to suggest that you need to build more affordable housing in the neighborhoods of greatest need. Well, that's not what you should be doing. You should be building affordable housing in the neighborhoods of greatest opportunity for the families and their children that are going to move into that affordable housing. where they're not facing declining schools like the Del Norte district, where they're not facing nearby strip shopping centers that are closing down or have a lot of vacancies, but they're facing, quote, good schools, which are good schools because they're high-performance schools, and they're high-performance schools because they're filled with high-performance kids, and so, yes.
I'm curious if you have any information on increased empathy when there are mixed incomes in a given school or neighborhood.
Well, I frankly can't tell you that I have studied what you might call the empathy factor, but I have seen, and it's relevant to our current presidential political scene, I have seen studies quoted which show that people that grow up in racially diverse communities or communities where they're exposed to new immigrants or where they're exposed to Muslims, etc., they recognize that these are just folks like themselves, and they don't. I mean, the most immigrant rejecting states in the nation are North Dakota and Idaho, which don't have any. They're just reacting to their fears in that respect. So I think that touches a bit upon the empathy question. You don't want to get a situation where, according to the report sent out to the federal government, you've got a racially and economically diverse student body, but you look at the classrooms and they're tracked rigorously so that they're really divided internally in those schools. You want to try to mainstream people as much as possible. I'm going to offer you a policy. It's called inclusionary zoning. And if you want to first of all think about exclusionary zoning. Exclusionary zoning is when the local city or county zoning code says you can only have single-family homes of a certain minimum size, and they set that size, well up there. Or you've got to have, you can only build them on lots of a certain minimum size, and that size is set up there. Or there are communities in this country which ban any apartment development, for example. Those are exclusionary zoning codes, and their design is to exclude people of certain income levels, which very heavily overlap with racial and ethnic characteristics as well. In effect, in America, Jim Crow by income is replacing Jim Crow by race. That's what's happening. Now, the Albuquerque area, by the numbers that I've seen and that I've calculated myself, is one of the most racially, ethnically integrated housing markets in the country amongst metropolitan areas of 500,000 or more people, 300,000 or more people. Okay? But there is a higher degree of economic segregation here than there ought to be. And when you go to the schools, it's much bigger than that, in part because of the very transfer policies that you cited, that there may be families living in neighborhoods which are much more up the scale, and so the neighborhood seems to be more economically integrated, but then they'll use the transfer policy to send somebody, their children, to another more favored school. And it unveiled for me my son teaches Spanish at Cleveland High School out in Rio Rancho. He's also the women's soccer coach. They're playing tonight, so I'm making the ultimate sacrifice for them tonight. But I said to him, why is this school offering Chinese? And he said, because fundamentally there will be parents who want their kid to come to this school. They won't live in this in this attendance zone, but they want their kid to come to this school, so they'll tell the school board, we want our kid to to study Chinese. And you can find that kind of situation all around the Albuquerque, that's the Rio Rancho School District. But the policy I was going to give you, inclusionary zoning, pioneered by Montgomery County, Maryland, back in 1973. Montgomery County, Maryland. In Maryland, county government is the basic government. You've heard of places like Bethesda or Silver Spring, perhaps. Those are just place names. They're post office addresses. They are chambers of commerce. They are not governments. Montgomery County Council and the county executive is the government of Bethesda or Silver Spring, and their planning and zoning policies cover 85% of the population and 90+% of the land in Montgomery County. And they require that any new housing development of 20 or more units, at least that 15% of those units must be affordable to people in the lowest third of the income scale in Montgomery County. Okay? And they further provide that their countywide public housing authority is going to buy 1/3 of that 15% or 5% of the